didn't know that because you'd never been inside a college practice. And there's a reason why Doug Collins hired him after my senior year to go to the Pistons. And then he spent 20 years in the NBA. And that the NBA is purely business. You can either coach or you can't. You either can play or you can't. And you're not going to stay at that level if you can't do the job. So I'm really lucky to play for Coach James and play with some incredible teammates. We had some really, really good guys on our team.
Talk about the recruiting process and what your kind of options were and why you ended up at Wilmington.
Yeah, so my sophomore and junior year on the varsity, I had to play the two guard, which wasn't my natural position because we had a really good point guard who was a year older than me, and he was 5'7". It was the only spot he could play, Danny.
Right.
And so I think my junior year in March, and this actually makes me angry a little bit. My junior year in March, I was like the 80th ranked player in the state of Illinois in our class. And 2 months later, the point guard graduated, so I got moved back to my natural position. And no complaints. For me, it taught me, like, you have to make sacrifices in order for the team to win. And it was absolutely right for me to play the two as a sophomore and junior. So anyways, all of a sudden in spring league, I'm back to playing the point guard, and, like, I move significantly higher up in the rankings because I'm playing the position that right. And back then, there's a huge difference back then. That it isn't, there was a big difference between being a two guard and being a point guard in 1994.
Right.
And I didn't like any of my early offers, so I rolled the dice and I played my senior year. Mm-hmm. And I got my heart broken. I tell this story. I was having a great year. Jim O'Brien was the head coach at Boston College, and that was like my dream school.
Okay.
I'm a Red Sox fan. I'm a Giants fan. I'm an Irish Catholic kid whose parents are in New York.
Taking the train to Fenway Park.
Yeah, going to Fenway. And they'd come, Coach O'Brien had come to see me play, and they offered me a scholarship. And they told me that I would come visit that next weekend. We played on Friday, but I would come on Saturday. And they said the scholarship would be exclusively mine for 48 hours. Now, that was a great staff. Paul Biancardi, who became a head coach, who now runs ESPN's recruiting. Rick Boyages, who's the head of the Big Ten for officials, and then a guy named Dave Spiller, who was a great coach. Well, it's this way now, but it was really more this way back then. Assistants got a little competitive. An assistant was kind of the point man, and so Paul Biancardi was recruiting a kid at Maine Central Institute. And Friday, the day before my visit, he went to Maine Central and convinced the kid, you need to come, because this other kid's come on a visit. And if you don't take it right now, this Billy Donlon kid's going to take it.
Right.
And so Friday night at midnight, Coach O'Brien called and just crushed me.
Oh, boy.
Broke my heart, said I don't have a scholarship. And
Did
it was
he try
crushing.
to get you to walk on?
No. My dad grabbed the phone because my dad had been a longtime coach and worked 5-star and knew Coach O'Brien, and my dad was not a happy camper. And you know what? It all worked out great. That kid ended up transferring from Boston College, and we actually played him at Wilmington, and I gave him the business. Danny, I don't know if I can say that on your show, but when we played against each other, I gave him the business. But it was a learning lesson for me in so many ways in terms of how you handle young people in recruiting, their families in recruiting. That's why we're as honest as you possibly can be. And then I decided I had a couple other high major schools, but I was 6'2", 170 pounds. I mean, and that's wet. I was really thin. I visited Wilmington. It's 8 hours from the Atlantic Ocean. 8 miles, not 8 hours, 8 miles from the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
It was an up-and-coming school. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the country. It was back then, and it is still now. And I've always been this way. It's what's drawn me to UMKC. I've always kind of wanted to be a part of the first.
Right.
And Wilmington had never gone to a tournament. Wilmington, they'd never won a championship in any sport, in any sport when I got there. And that was the first year when you visited, you could play with the guys on your visit. And I felt like after playing with them, I could play right away as a freshman.
Right.
And I went there. I chose that over Richmond. And so grateful that I did. Played for a great coach. Played for two great coaches, Coach Wainwright and then a young assistant named Brad Brunell. Was my position coach for 4 years. He was 25 when I got there, and we've become really, really close friends through the years. But love my time at Wilmington, awesome place, but that's why I went there, is because they had never won a championship, and it's just what drew me. And we won 2 regular season championships in my 4 years, and we lost in a couple conference championship games to go to the NCAA tournament, including one Richmond team coached by Coach Beeline. So life always comes full circle, but it was a great decision. Really, really, really lucky that happened.
Coach, there's stories when I was doing the prep for this that basically one of the first things that Coach Wainwright said to you was, "You don't guard, you don't play."
Yeah.
Were you much for defense when you were a high school player? And
no. No, I mean, guys, I tell guys now, because I'm such a defensive guy.
Right.
I tell kids, I said, look, if I go play a pickup game right now, I'm not playing any defense. I'm going to worry about offense. I'm like everybody else, but in order to win, I think Coach Wainwright, he was great, but they were hard on you, and I'm appreciative of that. They coached you hard.
He seemed from afar like a stern coach.
He is, but he did an incredible job of also relationship building. And you couldn't help but laugh. Like, for my first 3 months as a player, he said, "I'm calling you Billy Donlon." And I said, I didn't get it. He says, "You're looking at me." He said, "Do you know why I'm calling you Billy Donlon?"
Yeah.
And I go, "No." And he goes, "Because there's no D in your game. So there's not going to be any D in your name." So it was Billy Donlon because I didn't have any D. And
how long did it take you to earn the D?
I got it by the end of my freshman year. And then what's funny is, by my junior and senior year, they called me the glove because I became a guy that could really guard.
Right.
And it just showed that even a slow, unathletic guy like me, if you could think a play ahead, if you had some grit to you, you could really learn how to defend. And then the system was great. But no, it really made me do a 180 on my whole idea of basketball. And I love offense, and offense is critical. But it's really hard to win. I just heard somebody on the other day talk about how the 5 highest scoring teams in the NFL history didn't win the Super Bowl.
Right.
And there's certainly several teams that have been the best defenses
right
in the NFL, and they've gone on to win the Super Bowl. So, I think in every sport, pitching is defense. Pitching's not offense. Pitching is defense. Great
right.
Pitching wins. Great defense usually wins, and that was my experience as a player, and I've continued with that as a coach.
So you said that basketball was your whole life when you were in high school, and you didn't go to dances, and you didn't do that. Any social life in college?
Yeah, I met my daughter Marin's mom my freshman year. I'll never forget it. It was she was actually out on a date with one of my teammates, and
you're a bad man.
She would no, it didn't work like that. She was out on a date with one of my teammates, and my teammate was a really good guy. And he wasn't a guy that would date around. And I knew he had taken out another girl on a first date a couple nights prior. So I went, his name is Billy too, ironically. And I said, "Billy, if you decide to not date Lena, please let me know." And the great part of that story is the girl that Billy went out on the date with, Rebecca, right. They went on to get married. And then Lena and I went on to get married and have Marin. And then, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Right.
But I did, and we dated through college, and she's a terrific mom. And, I did have a little bit of a social life, but was still really driven with basketball, and you're on your own. And the great part was there's the difference between the winters in Chicago and Wilmington, North Carolina. And you're going to school in shorts every day.
So you finish up your career, Wilmington wins. You're a good player, obviously. But you've always thought you would be a coach. But you did coach for a year and then play pro basketball, is that correct?
I coached 2 years, and then went I was really and this isn't my senior year, we had a bad year. We were picked to win the league, and I think we finished 3rd or 4th. But we had a bad year. We had a really bad non-conference. Now, the schedule was brutal, but we had a bad year. I did not have a good season until like February. And we lost to George Mason, being coached by Coach Larinaga. And I missed a shot with 2 seconds left with the game tied to win it in regulation. And I missed it. We would go on to lose in overtime. And, I struggled. I had some depression. I really struggled with the way it ended. And
right.
I just wanted to get right into coaching. I didn't want to play. And then I went on to American U with Coach Z, with Rich Savosic, who, in coaching, there's a lot of guys that are really good coaches, but they're real tunnel visioned. There are very few guys who are really good coaches, but also see big picture for other people. And Rich Savosic is one of those guys, and was really lucky at 22 to be on a staff with him, and have stayed in touch with him forever. He's been a great mentor and friend. And then, we got fired at the end of the 1 year. And Coach Z told me, when you get fired in this business, you get a better job. And I did. I went from restricted earnings to being full-time at St. Peter's College in Jersey City. And it was there. I was working I was living with my grandparents in Sunnyside, Queens. So that was a great, again, I'm 23, and I'm not realizing that now at 42, I got to live with my grandparents in Queens, New York. How awesome was that?
Right.
And the hours were long. And I don't say that, look, coaches, we don't really work for a living. I mean, it's tough, but it's not like what a lot of other Americans do. We're really fortunate to do what we do. But I would get to the office at 6 a.m, and I'd get into New York at 8 o'clock at night, and I started playing pickup games around New York City from 8:30 to 11. Fall asleep, wake up at 4:30, office at 6, and repeat. And I was young. I was 23. And the passion for the game came back. And Danny, there's a guy named Bill Dooley who used to be the head coach at Richmond.
Right.
And Coach Dooley, his wife, was asked to run GMAC in Dublin, Ireland, which is where their headquarters were in Europe. So Coach Dooley took over Irish national basketball. And at St. Peter's, we were recruiting a young man who was at a prep school who's from Ireland. And I knew Coach Dooley, so I heard he was there. And he says, hey, you don't have to give up your job, but I'm putting together an Irish national team, and I can get you citizenship if your grandparents came over. And my dad's parents came over on the boat to Ellis Island.
Right.
And so he got me my passport. He got me Irish citizenship. So I played for the Irish national team and got myself in the best shape of my life. And it was hard. I said to Coach Leckie, who was the head coach at St. Peter's at the time, I said, Coach, I know you gave me the job, and we've had a great year together. We can see the program's going to get better. But I don't want to be 40 and have regret that I could have played in Europe against some of the best players in the world, because it's totally – back then you could only have 2 Americans on a team.
Okay.
And those Americans were NBA players.
Right.
But if you had Irish citizenship, if you could play on an Irish passport, you were competing against other Europeans, and I could do that.
Right.
I wasn't good enough to compete with the two NBA guys,
right.
But I was good enough to be a European. And so I played in Italy. I had a tryout, about a 2-month tryout with Benetton, Tony Kukoc's team. Mike D'Antoni was the coach. Mm-hmm. And after about 2 months, he got smart and cut me, which is why he's a great coach. And then I went to France, and then I went to Germany, and it was a great experience, and had to make a really hard decision. Brad Brunell became the head coach at UNC Wilmington, and he called me and asked me to come back, and I just thought long-term, I knew how special Brad was. And I know that you could be the world's best assistant, but if you're not working for a head coach who's really good, it's hard. And you could be the world's worst assistant. And if you're working for a head coach who's really good, you're going to be fine. Right. And I knew how good Brad was, and that's what I chose to do.
Our guest is Billy Donlon. He's the new head coach at UMKC. He's joining us on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing, and we'll have more coming up.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Before you spend your time and money going after an MBA, ask yourself why. Is it so you can tell people you got your MBA? So you can add a line to your CV? So you can call it a CV instead of a resume? Truth is, any MBA will do that. On the other hand, if your goal is to learn how to successfully manage and grow a business with real-world insights from experienced professionals, well, consider getting your MBA from Park University. Our low student-to-teacher ratio gives you personalized attention, and our face-to-face and online classes offered in 8-week terms are designed with working professionals like you in mind. No wonder the Kansas City Business Journal ranks Park University as the top MBA program in the area. Classes begin June 10th at all 4 KC area locations: Parkville, Downtown, Independence, and Lenexa. Visit park.edu to get started.
I was duped, and I recommend you be next. For better or worse, the ultra-realistic impression of me sits now in my wife's office to spook her on a daily basis. So what is Doob? D-O-O-B. It's the key